Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 1 running back rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're talking about all topics related to the running back position, beginning with matchups. I'll talk about which running backs going into Week 1 have perhaps the most advantageous or disadvantageous matchups, and how that's going to potentially impact their overall upside this week. Of course, then after that, I want to talk about how I believe the running back position is currently going to stack up with my top 36 running back rankings for Week 1, giving you guys my expressed opinions and, of course, the statistics that justify those thought processes and how I'm going to approach Week 1. Now, before we get into all of that and talk about the running back position and get your lineups ready for Week 1, of course, Thursday Night Football can't get any closer between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the defending champions, playing against the Dallas Cowboys. Extremely excited about that. But before we get into of course, the running back position, I want to take the time out of my day to, of course, continue to thank you guys for the incredible support. Whether you've continued to just view the channel, whether you smash that like button every day, comment down below, have joined the Discord community server, supported on Patreon, or by buying my draft kit this offseason. I cannot thank you guys enough for continuing to help grow this channel weekly. Outside of that, for those of you guys who haven't yet already, we're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season. Whether it is these running back rankings, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback rankings throughout the entire week to make sure that your lineups are ready to go by Sunday morning. Of course, if they're not ready by then and you still have questions, I'll be live streaming every Sunday from 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to kickoff. Of course, answering your questions with Kickoff with Kirchhoff, making sure that your lineups are ready to go, not only so you can win that given week, so we can get you closer to the goal that we're all trying to capture this season, which is capturing a 2021 fantasy football championship. And of course, the bragging rights over the people we play with. That's obviously the goal. But either way, again, I want to thank you guys for supporting the channel. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you click that bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. It'll notify you as soon as my latest video is dropped. I cannot thank you guys enough. I appreciate it. Okay, let's get into this, shall we? Today's video will be for a half PPR scoring format, of course, meeting everyone in the middle. Whether you play in a full PPR or a standard league, I had to meet everyone in the middle. Therefore, we go ahead and we do a half PPR scoring format. But if you want my entire rankings, you can go down to the description of the video and find my Patreon. I'll be producing my entire rankings for Patreon supporters, included with flex rankings, where I only offer it there on Patreon for those of you who are interested. Thank you very much in advance. Now, before we begin talking about the running back position, I have to mention that rankings are always subject to change. I mention this every single year and on every single ranking video because, again, throughout a week, regardless of when I post my rankings, there are always going to be things that transition and different variables that will impact the ranking of a player. For example, Zach Martin, the all-pro right guard for the Dallas Cowboys, he will not be playing on Thursday. That is certainly going to impact the overall productivity of Ezekiel Elliott. We don't know the status completely of Saquon Barkley, but as the week progresses, his ranking has 100% the ability to change and will change. So if in fact you're trying to stay up to date on that, you can either show up Sunday morning, support on the Patreon. Those are the ways to stay up to date. But again, rankings are always subject to change. There's always players that find themselves hurt or out by Sunday that we weren't anticipating. So don't take these as the end-all be-all. They're obviously going to change based on the different variables impacting them. All right, now that we've covered that, we can begin to talk about matchups at the running back position, giving you guys some perspective as to which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing running backs on a weekly basis on average in a half PPR scoring format, specifically by looking at the 2020 running back strength of schedule. These are statistics that I've already shown a lot of you this offseason to give you some perspective as to the matchups that we are going to see beginning in Week 1. Specifically, as you can see on the chart to the left of me, the number 1 ranked team was the Detroit Lions last season, which means they were giving up the most points to opposing running backs last season on average between weeks 1 through 17 and a half PPR. In fact, they were giving up 30 fantasy points per week to opposing running backs. That is incredible. I mean, every running back that plays against the Detroit Lions was scoring touchdowns, getting huge work, not even on the ground, but through the air. Now, in comparison, on the other side of the coin, the New Orleans Saints, Washington football team, Pittsburgh Steelers, these are defenses that have been stout up front year over year and have continued to give running backs trouble. Now, of course, we want to take this into account, and I'm going to be referring back to these statistics because when we think about the matchups going into 2021, of course, there are going to be players and rookies that are going to differently impact the specific defenses, but mainly their structures are going to be the same. The Detroit Lions are bringing back a lot of starters. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in fact, are bringing back all of their starters this upcoming season. So a lot of the team structures are going to stay the same. And in my opinion, a lot of their performances are going to be very similar. There's a reason why the Detroit Lions, Houston Texans, Las Vegas Raiders, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars, year over year have been one of the worst teams defensively, but also in terms of stopping the run. While in comparison, the Saints, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Los Angeles Rams, they have always been teams that are stout against the run. These are things that, of course, mainly have to do with their defenses and the way that they're structured. But ultimately, just wanted to kind of show you guys these statistics, kind of give you the breakdown as to how it all looked in 2020 so that we can anticipate what's going to happen in 2021. All right, now that we've gone ahead and covered that, we can begin my top 36 running back rankings, beginning with Christian McCaffrey of the Carolina Panthers. It shouldn't be a surprise. Christian McCaffrey should have been the number 1 overall pick. And for those of you who ended up selecting him, I want to congratulate you because you are going to have a fantastic season because he counts as honestly 2 running backs. In the last 19 games of Christian McCaffrey's career, he's averaged 26.06 fantasy points per game. I mean, the amount of fantasy points per game there is unreal in comparison to the rest of the league. On top of it, in the last 19 games, he's only had 2 performances of less than 19 fantasy points. Of course, Christian McCaffrey's been consistent, but he's found a lot of that consistency based on his ability to catch the ball. And when we're talking about a tougher matchup, again, the New York Jets haven't been a tougher matchup in terms of stopping the running back position. In fact, ranked 15th in terms of allowing points to opposing running backs last year. But you add Robert Saleh, you bring in a couple other defenders. Of course, they made some trades, obviously addressed some defensive line needs via the draft. I think, of course, they're going to be improved, but when you have a running back that can catch the ball 8-9 times in a singular game and is just as much of a receiving option as DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson in that lineup, I think, of course, his ceiling continues to rise, and that 26 fantasy point mark is there for a reason. I wanted to go ahead and see if, in fact, Christian McCaffrey had played against the New York Jets in the last couple years. Unfortunately, didn't, but he had the opportunity of playing against Robert Saleh's defense in 2019, the year that the San Francisco 49ers, of course, went to the Super Bowl, and they were one of the top defenses in that season, but they couldn't even stop Christian McCaffrey then when McCaffrey took on the 49ers defense. McCaffrey ended up going for 117 rushing yards on 14 carries, 1 rushing touchdown, 4 grabs on 5 total targets, and 38 receiving yards total, which is 25.5 fantasy points. Again, Christian McCaffrey, he is matchup proof, and he's going to continue to be a stud. Congratulations for those of you who have him. Make sure you get Chubb Hubbard just in case. We're moving on to our number 2, Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook plays against the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, another one of these teams that year over year have been awful in terms of stopping the run, and they really can't stop a soul defensively. I think the Cincinnati Bengals have been exposed year over year, and when we look at just the last couple matchups of the 2020 season, specifically weeks 15 through 17, they played against Benny Snell. Benny Snell went for 18.2 fantasy points against them. David Johnson went for 27.4, and J.K. Dobbins in week 17 went for 28 fantasy points. They cannot stop anybody. On top of the fact that Dalvin Cook is coming off the best career season with averaging 22.54 fantasy points per game last season in the 14 games that he played. Of course, he's going to come off fresh legs. This offensive line is going to be battering that defense, and they're going to find a lot of success right out the gate. I think Dalvin Cook as our number 2 is no surprise considering the matchup, his proficiency as an incredible runner, and of course, the fact that he is Dalvin Cook. And yeah, he's our number 2. We move on to Derrick Henry as our number 3. Derrick Henry is today's thumbnail. And of course, Derrick Henry, in comparison to the 2 gentlemen that I prior mentioned, is going to have potentially a little bit of a tougher matchup. Playing against the Arizona Cardinals, they of course have addressed some defensive needs, bringing in a J.J. Watt. But ultimately, Derrick Henry is matchup proof. Because of the opportunity volume that he's going to continuously get on a weekly basis, Derrick Henry is just, what are you going to do? Not play him? Absolutely not. That's why Derrick Henry, a guy that since Ryan Tannehill has taken over, has scored 29 touchdowns in the last 25 games and has averaged 126 rushing yards per game. So imagine if 126 rushing yards and a touchdown happen, 18 fantasy points, perhaps with the upside of 20. I mean, what more could we ask for? Derrick Henry, this offense, it's going to look a lot different because of the implementation of course, Julio Jones here with the new offensive coordinator, but you get a lot more talent back with Taylor Lewan. Of course, that's an all-pro left tackle. Derrick Henry against the Arizona Cardinals, in my opinion, though they are a little bit of a tougher defense, regardless of that, it's going to be tough for anybody to bring down Derrick Henry, and that is why he sits at our number 3 this upcoming week. We have Alvin Kamara as our number 4. Now, the last time Alvin Kamara played against the Green Bay Packers, again, the Green Bay Packers have given up the 5th most points to opposing running backs last season, and for the last couple seasons, in fact. They've been terrible in terms of stopping the run. Of course, Green Bay has a new defensive coordinator. I don't think that's going to matter, especially considering Alvin Kamara is coming in town. So here's the thing. Last time Alvin Kamara played against Green Bay, week 3 of the 2020 season, he had himself a game in which he had 6 total rushing attempts for 58 yards, 0 rushing touchdowns. But where he found his most value was the fact that he had 14 targets that led to 13 receptions, 139 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. It was a 38.2 fantasy point game. That performance is insane to me. But the question remains, if in fact you get into a matchup in which Jameis Winston isn't playing well, is he going to, in the late half of this game, in a negative game script, be able to throw the ball and dump it off to Alvin Kamara and find value there? I think that is 100% the reason why they have Jameis Winston as a starter in comparison to, of course, Taysom Hill. I think Alvin Kamara is going to be a fantastic option in my number 4 this upcoming week. Moving on to the other side of the coin in terms of this matchup, talking about the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Jones. They take on the New Orleans Saints. Again, the defense that has been the toughest in terms of not allowing many points to opposing running backs. With that said, Aaron Jones, when he played against the New Orleans Saints last year in week 3, he had himself a great day. Overall, his performance could have been better and potentially could be this upcoming season with the absence of Jamal Williams. But of course, A.J. Dillon will potentially be picking up all of that. But last year against them, 16 total rushing attempts for 69 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 2 catches on 4 targets, which of course led to 17 receiving yards, 0 touchdowns, 15.6 fantasy points. Now, the issue with this upcoming week is the fact that David Bakhtiari is on the physically unable to perform list. He will be returning later in the season, of course, tore his ACL at the back end of the 2020 year. That's an all-pro, perhaps the best left tackle in the National Football League. But I still think, regardless of that, Aaron Jones, his implementation in the passing game, of course, the fact that he has scored 30 touchdowns in the last 30 games of his career, he's going to find the end zone. He's going to find success this week. It's really hard to stop the run when you have to worry about Aaron Rodgers picking you apart all over the field. So, of course, Aaron Jones is going to benefit from that this week. Our number 6 is Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb playing against the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, he did that last season once in the NFL playoffs, but it was a little bit of a different dynamic in terms of his total opportunity and what he was exposed to. But going into this upcoming week, it's all about whether or not Nick Chubb is going to be given the opportunity, whether this game script is going to be positive enough for them to consistently run the ball. Because if Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, if they manage to gain a pretty big lead early on, of course, we'll see a lot of Kareem Hunt in this offense instead of the possibility of Nick Chubb continuing. But when I look at the 2020 season and how successful Nick Chubb was, in the games that he had 14 or more touches last season, he averaged 19.03 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. Feed this man the ball early and often. Let the best offensive line in the National Football League impose their will on this defense and continue to feast. I think there's a very good chance, especially against the Kansas City Chiefs defense that have given up the 11th most points to opposing running backs last season, can very easily, get battered early on by a Nick Chubb. It only takes one big run, and I expect Nick Chubb to find a lot of success, whether it is between the 20s or down on the goal line, especially considering the fact that, how much this team wants to run the ball, Kevin Stefanski's influence in terms of their offensive coordinator. All right, our number 7 running back for today is Jonathan Taylor. Now, Jonathan Taylor, again, had a very strong end of the 2020 season. Of course, solidified the fact that he was the number 6 overall running back, and of course, behind one of the better offensive lines in the National Football League, just dominated. Of course, the injury to Marlon Mack made a huge difference in 2020, and Marlon Mack will be returning, but I have no concern about Marlon Mack or Nyheim Hines. I believe that Jonathan Taylor is going to be given the ample opportunities to succeed, because similar to a Nick Chubb, like I just mentioned, when Jonathan Taylor last season was given 14 touches in a game, he averaged 16.88 fantasy points per game. He has just as much of an ability to catch the ball out of a backfield as a Nyheim Hines, and he can continue to grow. Going into his second year, let's not forget his rookie season, he didn't have an offseason. It was very much a Zoom-heavy offseason in terms of learning the offense and gaining some sort of rapport with Phillip Rivers. Going into this coming year, they will be dealing with a quarterback change, but right off the rip, playing against the Seattle Seahawks, in my opinion, this is going to be a higher scoring matchup between these two teams as they will be firing back and forth. Russ is going to be cooking on one side. It's just going to be a matter of whether Jonathan Taylor and this stud offensive line are going to be able to run through that defense. I think they'll be able to do so, of course, like they will do with every defense this year. That's why he maintains my number 7 spot. We move on to Joe Mixon as our number 8. Joe Mixon, again, I'll talk about it ad nauseum. He is an opportunity king. In terms of the opportunity that he's been exposed to as of late, in the last 15 games that Joe Mixon has played, he has touched the ball 24.2 times per game on average and scored 16.15 fantasy points per game. Again, that is an insane amount of opportunity leading to fantasy points, regardless of how inefficient he has been. A lot of those games, again, averaging 3 yards per carry, 2.7 yards per carry, but the inefficiencies don't bother me because now he gets even more work in the passing game with Giovanni Bernard out, and you're playing against the Minnesota Vikings. Man, the Minnesota Vikings have really tried to improve this defense, but Mike Zimmer is going to be in trouble because this defense is going to be at an all-time worst, in my opinion. Of course, their secondary is going to still be bad, but in terms of stopping the run, they're going to find very little success in doing so. When we talk about what they were giving up at the back end of the 2020 season, of course, the Lions duo of Swift and Adrian Peterson went for 26.8. David Montgomery went for 28.7 fantasy points. Alvin Kamara had the 6 touchdown game going for 48.7 fantasy points. James Robinson with 19.8, and even Rojo in week 16, or week 17, went for 14.9 fantasy points against them while splitting snaps with, of course, Leonard Fournette. This defense isn't going to be able to stop anybody. I don't expect them to even be able to stop Joe Mixon. The opportunity is certainly going to be there. And of course, they want to run the ball in order to eventually get Joe Burrow into his rhythm going forward. Our number 9 is Najee Harris. Of course, Najee Harris needs to be mentioned because he is one of the best running backs in the National Football League. And in my opinion, he has a very advantageous matchup. When everybody looks at the Bills defense, they think, oh man, the Bills defense is good. To be honest, in terms of stopping the run, they haven't been that good in comparison to a lot of other teams. What happens often is the fact that in 2020 specifically, how good the Bills offense was, respective, defenses, of course, were getting torched, but on the other side of the ball, the other teams were in negative game scripts. They couldn't run the ball in the second half because they were down points and they needed to catch up. So they never had to run the ball. So the amount of averages in terms of fantasy points allowed was lower. But in terms of the run stopping grades for the Bills defense, they're one of the worst in the league. In fact, the 4th worst when I was doing my running back strength of schedule video this off season. And when I look at Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds, in terms of their interior linebackers, they are not good at stopping the run. Their defensive line has been decent at times, but to be honest, they haven't even been able to stay healthy up front year over year. I think Najee Harris going into this upcoming week's matchup, again, the Buffalo Bills, in terms of total yards allowed, averaged last season giving up 120 yards to running backs and at least a touchdown per game. So when we think about the opportunity he's going to get, the defense he plays against, and of course how successful guys like James Conner in the past have been. When James Conner in his career at Pittsburgh, when they were giving him over 14 touches per game, the guy was averaging 15 plus fantasy points. I think Najee Harris is going to have his coming out party week 1 of the 2021 season against the Buffalo Bills. We have Austin Ekeler as our number 10. Again, Austin Ekeler, regardless of what defense you play, and I know the Washington football team, as of this current moment in time, is the second most difficult overall running back matchup for this week. Regardless of that, when we talk about what Austin Ekeler was able to do with Justin Herbert in the lineup, he averaged about 50 rushing yards and 50 receiving yards per game and 6.5 receptions per game and about 0.375 touchdowns per game. At the very least, in a half PPR scoring format, Austin Ekeler is going to have 13.5 fantasy points. And I think the upside of a touchdown and or a big run, big play in the receiving game is going to make the impact and get him into this top 12 contention overall. But again, when we talk about bad matchups and running backs that are going to have troubles on the ground, that's not a big deal, especially when they're able to catch the ball as frequently as Austin Ekeler is going to be able to do as potentially the second receiving option, or perhaps even the number 1 overall receiving option. This team depends on how many targets he and Keenan Allen will end up seeing this week. Either way, regardless of the matchup, I trust Keenan Allen as my number 10. Number 11 is Antonio Gibson. Gibby is on the other side of this coin, playing against the Los Angeles Chargers defense, which again, as of late, have been decent in terms of stopping the run. They get a new defensive coordinator, formerly of the Los Angeles Rams. If he can bring in that defense and at least, though he doesn't have an Aaron Donald, he has a Joey Bosa, and impose that against the Washington football team, it could be difficult. But when we look at the Washington football team and how they're constructed, they have one of the best run blocking offensive lines in the entire National Football League, and they are going to be able to bulldoze just about anybody, except for, of course, some of those really good teams in terms of upfront. Ultimately, I think Antonio Gibson's overall productivity is going to be limited because of the overall presence of J.D. McKissic. But if in fact they're going to give him the Christian McCaffrey role-esque full receiving work, full groundwork, and the goal line, I think Antonio Gibson this upcoming year can, of course, elevate his game. But for right now, considering there's a lot of questions to be answered in terms of his overall snap counts in comparison to other members in this backfield, of course, losing Peyton Barber and him going to the Raiders certainly helps. Doesn't give me as much concern on the goal line. But ultimately, that receiving work is going to be the big difference maker this upcoming season. But either way, Antonio Gibson against the Chargers is going to be pretty good. All right, we're going to have Ezekiel Elliott as our final RB1 for today's episode. Zeke was giving me a headache earlier today, to be honest, because I thought about ranking him outside of the top 12, but I thought to myself, listen, you drafted Zeke to play him every single week. Regardless of what matchup, you're playing your studs. Let's not get too cute with this. Ezekiel Elliott, regardless of the fact that he plays against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and are bringing back all 11 starters on their defense, I still think that there is a potential in which Ezekiel Elliott, regardless of the fact that Zach Martin is not going to be there in week 1, because again, he is going to be placed on the IR, it's going to be tough. I know that. But all Zeke needs to do is fall into the end zone, which is, he's a talented enough running back to do so. This offense is going to be able to get down into the red zone. I don't think they're going to be shut out by any means, but as long as he can get himself a touchdown, then he'll obviously sustain an RB1 standing. But he needs a lot of work in the passing game, because when I looked at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense last year, they only allowed 100 rushing yards to one running back, and that was Dalvin Cook. Outside of that, they have just been stuffing offenses week over week. And it's probably going to happen once again, in which Zeke's not going to find a lot of productivity on the ground, but his ability to catch the ball 50 plus times each of the last 3 seasons gives me hope that he'll get a lot of work in the passing game, and of course find that goal line work and find himself an overall stable game that's not going to kill us if we start him. That is why he is our number 12. Again, he is our stud. With as much ceiling as Zeke presents to us, there's no reason for us not to put him in our lineup this upcoming week. Our number 13 running back on the week is Gus the Bus Edwards. Look, if in fact you went and drafted Gus Edwards, don't expect this to be a weekly thing. He's not going to be able to play against the Las Vegas Raiders every single week, a team that's given up the 4th most points to opposing running backs on a weekly basis. Now, of course, Lamar Jackson is going to feast. Lamar Jackson is going to benefit from the fact that, of course, the Las Vegas Raiders cannot stop the run. But when I look at just the running back position and how much they've succeeded against the Las Vegas Raiders week over week, especially at the back end of the 2020 season, the Chiefs, the duo of course, Darrell Williams and Clyde Edwards-Helaire went for 30.3 fantasy points against them. The Chargers duo of Kalen Ballage and Austin Ekeler went for 21.3. The Jets duo of Ty Johnson and Frank Gore went for 26. Of course, the combination of Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor went for 39 points against them. The Dolphins backfield went for 31.4, and the Broncos went for 19 fantasy points. The Las Vegas Raiders in the last 6 games of the 2020 season were getting annihilated defensively. Sure, they brought in a couple players here and there, a couple of secondary guys, some new linebackers, but is that going to help you stop the run? No. It is a internal issue in terms of their entire structure, their defense, starting with their front 4. They need to fix that immediately. They haven't addressed that, and it's going to continue to be the reason why the Las Vegas Raiders suffer. And again, I think Gus the Bus Edwards, when he's given opportunity, he succeeds. He's one of the most efficient running backs on the ground, averaging over 5.2 yards per carry in the last 3 seasons of his career. I think he's absolutely going to knock this one out of the park and potentially get himself into the top 12 conversation if, in fact, the upside meets multiple touchdowns this week. All right, we have James Robinson as our number 14, another player that is going to be given ample opportunity because, of course, he is the lone back with Travis Etienne gone. I'm not really worried about, what Carlos Hyde presents to this offense, and he plays against the Houston Texans. Again, Houston gave up the 2nd most points to running backs last year. The last time James Robinson played against the Houston Texans last year, 25 total rushing attempts, 99 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown. Overall, a great week with 15.9 fantasy points. Of course, he's going to be able to produce something similar, if not better, this upcoming week, considering how much of an upgrade this offense will be seeing with the new quarterback play, some offensive, linemen replaced, and of course, Marvin Jones brought in. They're going to certainly improve. And when we look at what the Houston Texans are putting on the field defensively, they've lost a lot of starters. Their middle linebacker, their defensive end they traded for. They're clearing house. It is a full rebuild, and they're going to be giving up points. James Robinson's definitely going to be able to feast. We have Raheem Mostert as a number 15. Playing against the Detroit Lions in any capacity should be an automatic play in my eyes. I have Raheem Mostert as my number 15, even though he's playing against the easiest matchup at the running back position for a couple of reasons. Raheem Mostert is probably going to have a great game. Double-digit fantasy point minimum, probably get into that maybe 14 fantasy point plus range, based on the fact that, of course, throughout his career, he's averaged over 5 yards per carry every single year. On top of the fact that he is going to be the RB1 of this team starting, and it is a very potent San Francisco running offense, considering how great their offensive line is. George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk, they are built to run the ball under Kyle Shanahan's scheme. So with him leading the charge against the Detroit Lions, of course he's going to score early and probably often, but the issue is what happens when they're up 30 points. And the conversation is presented that, yeah, we got to probably pull out Raheem Mostert. I mean, the Lions, guys, they were giving up, I think they gave up 30 total touchdowns to opposing running backs last season. And in the last 4 to 5 games of the season, they gave up 20.5 fantasy points, 14.9, 25.1, 22.2, and 28 points to starting running backs of opposing teams. A fully healthy 49ers offense is going to blow through them. I think Mostert is going to play feast, but then they're going to bring in Sermon, and that is going to kind of siphon some value because I don't see Detroit competing and letting Mostert play for majority of the game. We have Clyde Edwards-Helaire as our number 16 going into this upcoming week, playing against the Cleveland Browns. Again, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I've talked about him. I talked about him a couple days ago in a video. At the beginning of the 2020 season, from weeks 1 through 6, he was given the opportunity to be the starting running back with about 21.33 touches per game. I think that we're going to get back to that. Andy Reid earlier today was talking about the fact that he looks good at practice. Coming back from that ankle injury, he should be a full go this week. I think as soon as you get him into this lineup, I know the Cleveland Browns have been one of the better, quote-unquote, run-stopping defenses in terms of allowing points, but ultimately, it was mainly because their secondary was awful last year, and all you had to do was throw the ball against Cleveland. You didn't really have to run it. So this upcoming week, with a new offensive line, I think there's absolutely going to establish their own, whether that is early because it is a close matchup or later because they're ahead and they're trying to kill clock. I think Clyde Edwards, of course, his contributions in the passing game can't be understated because, again, he could very easily be the number 3 receiving option in this team in terms of targets, receptions, and in terms of overall productivity there. We move on to number 17, Chris Carson. I think Chris Carson's a decent play this week. Though the Indianapolis Colts defense has been fantastic in terms of stopping the run, I still think that Chris Carson, regardless of matchup, is one of those running backs that is going to be able to feast because of how the offense produces. If, in fact, the Seattle Seahawks get into a situation where they're running the ball and they're not able to find a lot of consistency, they aren't a team that's willing to just ditch running the ball. They're, of course, going to get Russell Wilson cooking, and if and when he does get cooking, that's obviously going to lead to, of course, targets, receptions, yardage there, and receiving touchdowns. Just go back to last season, week 1, the Atlanta Falcons game. Of course, Chris Carson did nothing on the ground. He played against a defense that, of course, is better in terms of stopping the run, but he got himself 2 receiving touchdowns in that game, a lot of work in the passing game. He is a multifaceted, dynamic running back that, if in fact is in a tougher matchup, is still going to find a way to succeed. Of course, I've talked about it end over end. Chris Carson is going to have a lot of potential goal line opportunities this year, considering the fact that he wasn't there, and a lot of those opportunities were going to Tyler Lockett. I think he'll definitely be able to plug up the middle, find a lot of success this week as my number 17. We move on to our number 18, which is Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, in my opinion, this week is in a very iffy situation. Earlier today, I read a report from Bleacher Report, if I'm not mistaken, that mentioned that he was a full go today. He practiced full pads, and he's good. But the team is still saying that he's probably going to be limited by Sunday against the Denver Broncos. I don't expect them to give him a full reign of opportunity. I do expect a lot of Devontae Booker to be peppered in. Maybe 50-50, maybe 60-40 in the direction of Saquon Barkley. But as of this current moment in time, 60% snap count from Saquon Barkley is a lot better than a lot of other running backs. You got to remember, a couple years back, Saquon Barkley, in a per-game basis, I think it was in 2018 or 2019, he was a better overall fantasy point contributor than Christian McCaffrey was. So again, he is at the overall ceiling of being able to get into that conversation. It's just a matter of whether he's healthy enough to get there and produce. And this matchup against Denver really isn't that difficult. At the back end of the season, Denver gave up 21 points to Josh Jacobs, 15 to Ekeler, 24 to Singletary and Zach Moss combined, and Mike Davis went for 23.8 in the final week of the season against them. So again, I really do think there's a potential in which, of course, Saquon Barkley could end up having a good game here, But if he's not given full reign, I'm not willing to fully go in on him this week because there's a potential of having some of these other running backs that have potentially more opportunity. We move on to the next running back I want to talk about, number 19, Mike Davis. I just mentioned him, of course, having some pretty good games last year for the Carolina Panthers, but this upcoming year, different uniform, same division, the NFC South, playing for the Atlanta Falcons in an Arthur Smith offense. I think a lot of people are underestimating the amount of opportunity he's going to have. Again, you bring in Wayne Gallman, not worried about it. You have Cordell Patterson, not worried about it. This is a running back that has played against the Philadelphia Eagles that have been one of the better up fronts. Fletcher Cox, of course, Brandon Graham, a couple of years. I mean, these guys have been great overall defenders, but I'm not too worried about it. I think the ability for Mike Davis to get involved in the passing game as he has shown in his past, and the fact that last season, the Philadelphia Eagles, over the year, they've given up points. It's not like they're impenetrable defense. There were games in which Chubb, of course, Zeke, Dalvin Cook, they were just racking up yards and touchdowns against that defense. It's just a matter of finding the pocket and being able to successfully run the ball. Either way, even if he's not able to, and he puts up the patent, I guess, Mike Davis performance of 14 rushes for 45 yards, I think he can get the ball out of the backfield 4 to 5 times and solidify value there. And of course, is going to have all of the goal line work, which Gurley had last year, and Gurley was able to, at least throughout the first half of the season, be a top 12 overall running back. We have Darrell Henderson as the next running back I wanted to mention. Specifically, the reason why I have Darrell Henderson this low is because, again, they play against the Chicago Bears. It has not been a fun matchup for anybody against the Chicago Bears in terms of the running game. Last season, in fact, Darrell Henderson played against this team and was the starter in that given week, had 15 rushing attempts for 63 rushing yards, 0 rushing touchdowns, 2 targets, 2 receptions, 13 yards for a grand total of 8.6 half PPR fantasy points. Not the greatest week that you could possibly want out of your running back, but ultimately going into this upcoming week, unless Darrell Henderson is going to score a touchdown, which I think there's a very good chance of him doing so, I think that's what we can expect. We can expect maybe 70, 80 yards, couple catches here and there. If he gets a touchdown, his upside, of course, elevates him to that next level. But as of this current moment in time, I think Darrell Henderson, still a great option, is going to lead this backfield. Of course, hopefully his thumb is ready to go by this upcoming Sunday for Sunday Night Football. We move on to the next running back for today's video. It is Miles Sanders. Now, he plays against the Atlanta Falcons. We've talked about the Atlanta Falcons a couple times already today in terms of them having the 5th best run stop in terms of giving up points to opposing running backs. They've been pretty good, but I think the main reason of that actually existing is the fact that Atlanta didn't have a secondary last year. People just threw the ball and never had to run against them. And though they do have pretty good defenders in terms of their front 7 and be able to get sideline to sideline and stop running backs, their secondary was their biggest weakness. And the issue is, though Miles Sanders is potentially going to have himself some success here, his passing upside with the amount of snaps that, of course, Boston Scott has seen this preseason and during training camp, of course, Kenneth Gainwell there, it's going to be tough for me to assume that Miles Sanders is going to be anywhere in the top 20 because, again, he really needs the upside of a touchdown or major work in the passing game to get to that next level in comparison to these other guys. When he was with Jalen Hurts last year, he was a significantly better running back. So hopefully with the improved offensive line and Jalen Hurts there, he could end up having himself a great overall game in week 1, but as of right now, he still sits in this bottom end of the RB2 conversation. Certainly a starter nonetheless because of how much opportunity he's going to see, but nothing too out of control in terms of the overall rankings. David Montgomery is our number 22. Now, David Montgomery is relatively low in comparison to where many of you may have thought he was going to be. Montgomery plays against the Rams. The Los Angeles Rams year over year have been one of the best run-stopping defenses in the National Football League. In fact, were the 4th best last season in terms of points allowed to opposing running backs. And in fact, in the last 2 seasons, have played against David Montgomery. In those contests, Montgomery's found very little success. In fact, last year, 2020, Montgomery had 14 rushing attempts for 48 yards, 0 rushing touchdowns, was able to get himself some success in the passing game. 5 targets, 5 receptions, 21 receiving yards for a grand total of 9.4 fantasy points. Now, in my opinion, that's great. Honestly, if he can at least get the passing work, maybe get himself in the end zone, then we have ourselves a great week. But again, it's a tough matchup. I know that the Los Angeles Rams at the back end of the 2020 season were struggling against running backs. In fact, at the last 9 games of the season, allowed 8 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs. If in fact the Rams are in that similar mode, and David Montgomery can score a touchdown, by goodness, I think he would be pretty good play because, again, the overall opportunity of play is going to be there. There's no Tariq Cohen to mess with him. I'm not worried about Damien Williams overall. He's probably going to touch the ball 20 times. So if he can at least run the ball for 4 yards per carry on 20 carries, score a touchdown, get some work in the passing game, we got ourselves a pretty good conversation here for David Montgomery even being better. But if he ends up with the 14 carries, 30 some odd yards like he had in 2019 or 40 some odd yards that he had last year and doesn't score a touchdown, that's where it begins to fall apart. Damien Harris is our number 23. Again, Damien Harris is in a very interesting scenario that is very similar to the last two running backs that I've mentioned. The touchdowns are so pivotal to these running backs because they don't really get an incredible amount of work in the passing game to where it's an Austin Ekeler-esque kind of range where they're catching the ball 7 times for 70 yards. It's not at that capacity, if not at all. So the issue with a guy like Damien Harris, despite, of course, the opportunity being there for him with the absence of Cam Newton, the goal line work will be available. Playing against Miami is a decent matchup, and to be honest, will be tougher than a lot of the other teams in the National Football League, but the Patriots have played against them twice a year for, however long they've been in the AFC East together. Regardless, last year, Sony Michel, this offense, the way that Josh McDaniels approached it, Sony Michel was able to succeed. In fact, in the 2 games that Michel was the starter, of course, Damien Harris was out for both of those games. Sony Michel put up 20 total rushing attempts, 111 rushing yards, and 1 rushing touchdown with 1 grab on run target for 8 receiving yards. Overall, in 2 games, Sony Michel averaged 9.2 fantasy points against the Miami Dolphins. In my opinion, I think there's a very good chance that Damien Harris could put up that kind of yardage, but the touchdown is almost a guarantee in my eyes. I think there's a very good possibility that this man scores, and if and when he does, he takes his 8-point game to potentially in that double-digit range. We move on to number 24, Josh Jacobs. Now, Josh Jacobs is low, and I understand that, but he plays against Baltimore, guys, and the issue that I have with playing against Baltimore is that Baltimore is going to score so many points, and they're going to blow this team out so badly, it is going to look a lot like week 1 of the 2020 season. If you remember, Baltimore blew out the Cleveland Browns. Where did Chubb go? Chubb went to the bench. Who came in? Kareem Hunt. He succeeded, and this is what it's going to look like. I think the Baltimore Ravens are going to put up a lot of points against the Raiders. The Raiders are going to turn to Kenyon Drake in the second half because they'll be throwing a lot, and though Josh Jacobs has the potential of scoring a touchdown and finding himself value, it is a very slippery slope considering the matchup and the potential negative game script that will be on hand. And again, there's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of how this backfield is going to be able to filter and rotate. Maybe it's an RBBC bringing in Peyton Barber on top of having Jalen Richard still and Kenyon Drake and Jacobs. Ooh, please just don't be a circus. That's all I ask. All right, we're moving on to our final 12, the RB3 category, beginning with DeAndre Swift. Now, Swift sits here only because of the questions regarding his injury. He's dealing with a groin injury. The last that I heard was that the head coach of the Detroit Lions mentioned that there was a possibility that he was not going to play in week 1. And if that's going to be the case, then of course we can throw Jamal Williams right in here. But if in fact he's going to play coming off the groin injury, he has the potential of being a high-end RB3 with the potential of being a low-end RB2 if the touchdown upside is there. But his main value is going to generate from the fact that, of course, they'll be in a negative game script because they're going to significantly lose against the 49ers. In 12 of his 13 games last year, he had 3+ receptions. Anthony Lynn led offense. They're going to throw the ball to the running back position. Jared Goff, in his career in the last 2 years against the 49ers, has had a 56% passing completion percentage and has only averaged 10.7 fantasy points per game in the last 4 games against them. So obviously Jared Goff has not succeeded against that defense. They know how to go ahead and handle him. And of course, they're going to throw the whole time. So why not get the ball to DeAndre Swift more than 5 times? I mean, honestly, could get himself a lot of success there and find himself some good value. My number 26 is Myles Gaskin. There's a lot of questions to be answered with Gaskin, but hopefully the Miami Dolphins offense is going to just feature him as the guy like they did last year. In the 10 games he played, the guy was averaging about 17+ touches per game, almost 14 fantasy points per game. Those are the numbers that we want to once again see, and that's what we invested in this offseason. You play against the New England Patriots. I know that the New England Patriots at the back end of the 2020 season were awful, giving up 171 yards to Akers. Against the Dolphins duo of Salvin Ahmed and Matt Breida, they gave up 200 rushing yards and a touchdown. Against the Bills duo, 90 yards and a touchdown. Against the Jets duo, 90 yards and a touchdown. But we have to understand that the New England Patriots are a significantly improved defense in terms of all the players that they got back that were opted out last year and all the money that they spent this offseason bringing in new talent. Of course, last season, During week 1, Myles Gaskin did have an opportunity of playing the Patriots, scored 8.6 fantasy points against them, but unfortunately, Jordan Howard stole a touchdown. If this upcoming season, Malcolm Brown becomes the Jordan Howard of the Miami Dolphins, we're going to be in trouble. But if, in fact, we get Myles Gaskin continuously used in the passing game like he was last season, and given the goal line opportunity, he far and away exceeds this ranking and gets definitely into the top 18 this upcoming week. If, in fact, all of those variables are there: receptions, full workload, goal line touchdowns. That's what we need in the case of Myles Gaskin. We have Kareem Hunt as our number 27. Again, Kareem Hunt could very easily come in and be an overall better producer than Nick Chubb that I have at number 5. Because the fact, again, the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be putting up points. And whether or not the Cleveland Browns keep up with them is going to dictate whether or not Kareem Hunt is going to be on the field. If we go to the NFL playoffs last season, again, even though Patrick Mahomes were knocked out of that game, a lot of the game script was the Cleveland Browns trying to catch up and be able to score enough points to beat the backup for the Kansas City Chiefs to get to the AFC Championship game. But unfortunately, we're not able to do so. Regardless, in that game, we did see a lot of opportunity go in the direction of Kareem Hunt. In fact, in the 2 playoff games that they played last year, Kareem Hunt scored 3 touchdowns total. So again, we know that the touchdown upside's there. We know that his opportunity is certainly going to be there, considering they are one of the most successful rushing teams in terms of overall opportunity of attempt and or passing the ball to their respective backfield members, specifically isolated to Kareem Hunt, who of course will succeed in a half PPR scoring format. But as of right now, regardless of the scoring format, regardless of the game script, I think Kareem Hunt is going to find success because he has goal line opportunities, he has the receiving work, and he will be given enough to be able to succeed this week. We have Chase Edmonds as our number 28. Chase Edmonds has a very tricky situation because, again, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered this upcoming week. But as it currently stands, I think Chase Edmonds is going to find a lot of success. But the issue with him, in my mind, is that last year, in comparison to all running backs in the National Football League, he played the most percentage of snaps from the slot position. They bring in Rondale Moore with their draft pick. He is going to be playing in the slot, filling in for Larry Fitzgerald. If, in fact, Chase Edmonds is not going to get his work out of the slot position, there is a viable chance in which Chase Edmonds isn't going to be that 10-plus point kind of guy, and that is why I leave him at this range, because I do expect James Conner to get featured a little bit. Maybe he's not going to be the Kenyon Drake of last year and fill into that role, and maybe they end up splitting it. But again, if they're going to split it, I'll of course prefer the guy that is obviously going to get more work in the passing game, which will be Chase Edmonds in this specific case. Playing against the Tennessee Titans is an incredible matchup. Last year, in the last 3 games of the season, gave up 22.2, 25.4, and 19.5 fantasy points to the opposing running backs that they faced in those given weeks. I think all in all, it's a matter of whether or not he's going to be featured in the passing game and how many rushing attempts we're going to see from him, because we know he's an incredibly efficient player with the opportunities that he's been given. So overall, should be a great play. We have 29, Leonard Fournette. I think Leonard Fournette, what he did in the playoffs, those 4 consecutive weeks, pretty much solidifies him as the starter for this team. Throughout those 4 games of the playoffs against Washington, of course against the Saints, then followed up with Green Bay, and then the Kansas City Chiefs, he ended up, averaging 20.5 overall touches per game. That's incredible. Scored 4 touchdowns, averaged 4.7 yards per carry throughout the playoffs, and in my opinion is the starter. I've heard a couple rumblings about, of course, Giovanni Bernard dealing with an injury, but potentially practicing this week. Regardless of that, regardless of Rojo's presence, I still think that Leonard Fournette is going to be treated as a starter here. And as of right now, playing against Dallas, giving up the 10th most points to opposing running backs last season, they have not improved their defense at all. In my opinion, I know Michael Parsons makes a difference, but they have a lot of issues that they have besides just bringing in a rookie that they have yet to deal with that is definitely going to be exploited by this Tampa Bay incredible offensive line and, of course, their attack, especially on the ground. Javonte Williams is my number 30. I want to go ahead and also in the same vein bring up Melvin Gordon because he's my number 31. I don't know what's going to happen. I truly don't. From what I can tell, there's going to be a split to begin with, but if Javonte Williams comes out as a starter, I won't be surprised. I truly will not be. So it's a matter of who is going to be given the starting position and who is going to honestly just be the better overall player with the opportunity that they're given. Because last year, we had Phillip Lindsay as the automatic starter there, and then Melvin Gordon came in and immediately took his spot and just blew out Phillip Lindsay. It could be the same case in which Javonte Williams comes in, really feels himself in this offense. The coordinator is all in on Javonte Williams considering the high draft pick that they spent on him, and he just becomes the full-time Denver starting running back. And if that's going to be the case, playing against the New York Giants in the last 3 games of the New York Giants season, they gave up at least 50 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown to every starting running back that they played from weeks 15 through 17. So there's a potential where Javonte Williams could be great. But ultimately, as of right now, I think they split the backfield and both find success this upcoming week. But until then, we're just going to have to play it by ear and see exactly the snap counts and the opportunities that are going to be given out. Tre Sermon is my number 32. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Raheem Mostert is going to kill this Detroit Lions defense. And if and when he does, and this team is up a lot of points because, of course, Jimmy G, Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, of course, they're going to put in Tre Sermon. And, of course, he's going to find a lot of success behind the number 1 offensive line of the 49ers. And they're going to be able to plow through that defense, get a lot of points. I think Tre Sermon very rarely is going to be an automatic start until he becomes the full-time starter of this team. But for in this circumstance, considering the matchup, is a great play. James Conner is my number 33. I mentioned him in regards to whether or not he is going to be the next Kenyon Drake of this offense, considering Kenyon Drake had 250 plus touches last year and was a full-time running back with the amount of red zone rushing attempts he was given, targets out of the backfield. Of course, he was given the full workload. If, in fact, James Conner comes in, of course, I don't know if he's going to immediately be given that full workload. I don't think his body is capable of handling that and sustaining for an entire season. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a split. But regardless, playing against the Tennessee Titans, it is one of the easiest matchups amongst all, considering the fact that they gave up the 7th most points to opposing running backs last season. And of course, haven't really improved that much defensively up front. We have Ronald Jones at number 34. I think if, in fact, the Dallas Cowboys fall apart and they're not able to do anything to this Tampa Bay offense, Tampa Bay is going to run away with this lead. And if, in fact, they do, Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette, they're going to run the ball heavily in the second half and play keep away. And when they do, they're going to find success because this Dallas Cowboys defense, in terms of stopping the run, has a hole in it. And that hole is going to lead to potentially an 80-yard run for Ronald Jones to the house. We'll see. We have David Johnson as number 35, playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that gave up, the 3rd most points to opposing running backs last season. I think all in all, David Johnson is going to have the potential of losing some snaps or touches to Mark Ingram, to Phillip Lindsay. That is going to play a big difference considering the fact that David Johnson was the best last season when Duke Johnson wasn't there. And now that he has another running back in the backfield that is going to siphon touches, carries, total overall opportunity, it's going to hurt him. But regardless, last season when he played against the Jacksonville Jaguars, his last time that he played against them had 17 rushes for 96 yards and 2 catches for 17 yards for 10.8 fantasy points. If he can put up another similar week like that, maybe accompany one of his couple carries for a rushing touchdown and at least sustain a 10-point balance, I think he'll be a pretty good overall play this week as a low-end RB3. The last gentleman I wanted to mention is, in my opinion, the guy that as of week 1 is going to be the starter for the New York Jets based on everything that I've seen from reporters, writers, and from the organization themselves. They did not play much of Tevin Coleman this preseason because they want to keep him healthy and they want to keep him ready to go week 1. The thing that you guys have to keep your eye on is the fact that Tevin Coleman, playing against the Carolina Panthers, they gave up the 9th most points to opposing running backs last season. The Carolina Panthers are a mess defensively, and they will be giving up a lot of points on the ground. In fact, the last time that Tevin Coleman played against the Carolina Panthers, 2019, when he was with the 49ers, he went for 11 carries, 105 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 receptions for 13 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown, 36.8 points. That's what he did to them in 2019. Again, Carolina hasn't really improved since then. They lost Luke Kuechly. There's been a lot of problems. Of course, they've addressed cornerback, but I think the Carolina Panthers could get beat down. Not that badly because we're talking about the Jets and not the 49ers rushing attack, but regardless, I think Tevin Coleman is going to be the starter. He's going to be given the opportunity. I know there's a running back by committee ready to take over if, in fact, he begins to fail with Ty Johnson, Michael P. Ryan, and Michael Carter. But as of this moment in time, he sits as my number 36. I want to thank everybody for watching this incredibly long video. But again, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be talking about 36 running backs every single week. Of course, 36 wide receivers, my top 16 quarterbacks and tight ends, giving you guys my perspective and opinions as to how I think everything is going to pan out for every single week of the season to help you win a 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. If you like today's video, click the like button down below. Let me know down in the comment section what you guys think about today's rankings. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join the community. I cannot thank you guys enough for your incredible support as of late. Until tomorrow, where we talk about my top 36 wide receivers for week 1 of the 2021 season. I'll see you guys. Thank you. Peace.